Hey, Joyful Journeyer, Anita Adams here, your host. And today I'm excited to introduce you to Megan Sheldon, who is the co founder and CEO of Be Ceremonial, the world's first guided ritual app that empowers you to create your own ceremonies across the life cycle. Megan is also a cultural mythologist, secular celebrant, and End of Life Doula, who supports individuals, families, and communities moving through grief. Today, we are going to talk about rituals for death, dying, and grief. Welcome, Megan. I'm so pleased to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you and I were speaking recently, and I was sharing with you that I had recently lost my uncle, and some of the experiences around his passing and leading up to that time, I feel personally really prepared me for dealing with his death. And so when I learned about the work you do, I thought, oh, this would be really great to have a conversation around death and dying and dealing with grief. And then I learned more about some of the ceremonies that you teach people, and then about your app. And I'm like, oh, this is so interesting, and we need to have more of these conversations. So thank you again for making time in your busy schedule to be a part of this and to share your wisdom with our audience. Before we get into all that you do and the lessons that you can share with us, I'm really curious to know what inspired you to become an end of life doula in the first place.
Yeah, it was interesting listening to you talk about your own experiences. I find there's kind of two camps of people who are drawn into the death doula, end of life care kind of role. Either they're people who had a really beautiful experience and they learned what was possible and they saw death not as something that is ugly and that we need to be afraid of and run away from, but instead it was an experience that kind of brought the whole death and dying process more into the living, into the life experience. Or there's the people who had a really difficult experience. It was either very traumatic or it was, there was no ritual, there was no ceremony. It was something that was just really void and lacked that connection that many of us are seeking. So my experience was the latter.
Hmm.
I went through a period of great loss about 10 years ago. It started with my father-in-law receiving a terminal diagnosis right before my husband and I were about to be married. And then it kind of progressed into a time of recurrent miscarriages between my husband and I. We had three losses. And then we had a live child born, my daughter. And then my father-in-law died when she was 2 months old. So there was about a 2-year span there where we went through more grief than I knew was possible. And what I learned different types of grief, anticipatory grief, ambiguous loss, compounded grief. So, it wasn't just the miscarriage that I was grieving. It was the due date when I finally reached a due date and didn't have a live child. It was the day my father-in-law received a terminal diagnosis and we didn't know what to do and how to process that kind of news. And for the most part, our society, I'm identify as non-religious. I'm a humanist. I don't have strong connections, or at least I didn't, to my cultural heritage and my lineage. So when all of that was happening, the kind of natural response, around me was to do nothing. People didn't know what to do, and it wasn't their own fault. It wasn't something that they were doing out of harm's way. They were just confused, and they didn't want to make things worse, so they didn't want to talk about it. And that leads to a feeling of isolation. I had a friend share with me that there is a ceremony-shaped hole in our society right now. And as soon as she said it, my heart just kind of stopped. And I thought, yes, that's exactly what I've been feeling. I've been feeling this craving for recognition, acknowledgement, validation of all of the things that I'm feeling. And yet there was nothing. And so, like many of us, when there is nothing, we set out to create something. So I then spent the last 10 years researching and learning and acquiring and talking with people and listening to stories and practicing different types of ritual and ceremony to, at first it was to heal my own heart and my own journey and to validate what I was experiencing. And then it was for friends and then friends of friends. And then it just kind of snowballs from there. And suddenly we're building an app for people around the world. And we've got, about 4,000 people in 14 countries around the world drawing inspiration from the rituals that we've been able to kind of come up with. So, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. You're clearly filling a need, and helping people move through something that is can be very challenging. And our society has made death and dying and all that taboo subjects, and it makes it, I think, harder, a lot harder for somebody to grieve and to move through that experience. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. I think it's really important and interesting. It's interesting, like that's
Yeah.
been
It's
very.
interesting because death and dying used to be around us all the time.
Mhm.
You think back to 100, 150 years ago, and, for sure, little children would see a dead body. The parlor in the home was meant for bringing our dead in and grieving them and saying goodbye and having this form of reverence, or, allowing your body and your mind to catch up and your emotions to be processed. And then death was kind of taken away from us, and it was medicalized and sanitized and moved into kind of hospital settings, which I understand the reason for. And there is definitely a place for that. But what ended up happening is we lost touch with how to be with people who are dying. We lost touch with what we're supposed to do. And we default. Most often what happens when somebody dies, the first thing we do is pick up the phone and say, what now? Like, what are we supposed to do? When the most beautiful thing we can do is simply pause, put on the kettle, sit and have a cup of tea and just process what's happened and be in the company of a dead body and not feel like it's something we have to rush through and get out of our house and get out of our space. Um, so yeah, just kind of there's a community death care movement happening around the world of trying to reclaim how to be with people when they're dying and how to be with a dead body and not have it be something that's so foreign to us. And yeah, I think that's part of our own, um, wellness, health, and healing kind of journey. We're all just trying to make sense of what happens when somebody dies.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. So, can you talk to us about ritual and ceremony and why it's so important?
Yeah, so where I start with ritual and ceremony is to kind of move away from a prescriptive definition. And I always say my rituals are descriptive, not prescriptive. So I'm not here to tell you exactly what to do. I think that there's enough of that going on in the world. And a lot of people come to me and we have to kind of unpack our baggage and our bias and our preconceived notions of what we think ritual and ceremony is, because the Wikipedia version that you would get is not my definition. That's not, they usually give you words like religious and repeated and rigid. And there is 100% a place for rituals that are passed down over time across culture, through ancestry and as part of a religious or a cultural tradition, for sure. And yet what happens for those of us who are don't have that? We don't have that built-in container of how to move through times of change, and not just death and dying, but all kind of rites of passage in life. And birth and death are these two thresholds, and that's usually when people come. They feel that ceremony-shaped hole when they're going through something as big and as life-altering as a birth or a death, and they don't know what to do because they've lost touch with those. So when I talk about ritual, I'm very mindful of not appropriating from other cultures. I look at the universal elements of ritual. I have researched into across culture, across time. I have a master's in cultural mythology, so that's my passion of really digging into myth and ritual and ceremony and where it's all come from. And I think it's in us. I'm not here to teach people how to do ritual. I'm here to help them remember,
I
because
love
I
that.
think
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's in our bones. It's something that we are innate. I have two small children and they are naturally ceremonial. I don't even have to give them much. I give them a little bit of a container. We'll find a dead bird in the backyard and naturally I'll ask them what they would like to do and they will move through this experience and they'll go and spend 5 or 10 minutes picking flowers and circling it around the bird and saying their own farewells and their own forms of gratitude. And I'm not telling them what to do. I'm just giving them permission to kind of step into that ceremonial space and see what shows up. So the definition that I work with that I invite your listeners and yourself to take inspiration from and then spend a little time thinking if that's something that you identify with or if you want to shift it. But for me, a ritual is an intentional, symbolic action that hopes to create meaning in life. So it's intentional that you are not just doing it because you've always done it. You are actually stepping into this. I say we fall into routine and we step into ritual. So you are stepping into it with an intention. It's symbolic. You're drawing on some kind of symbolic connection that you might have. Maybe you're choosing an old teacup that your great grandmother left you, and you want to drink your morning tea out of that and connect with your lineage and your ancestry. And so you specifically chose that teacup because it's personal for you. It's a symbol. And then it's an action. And what you might take a rock and go down to the beach and imbue it with all your anger and throw that rock as far as you can into the ocean. That act of throwing becomes part of the ritual. An action can also be inaction. So here in Canada, we have a beautiful ritual around Remembrance Day of holding a nationwide moment of silence. So the action is doing nothing. It's holding silence. It's connecting with our breath. And then the fourth is with the hope to create meaning. And this is where I really invite people to give themselves a lot of permission to try and not have it be perfect. The hope to create meaning means that we're going to try this and we're going to bring this ritual into our life, or we're going to be with somebody who's going through something, and it might not always work. It might not always be what we thought it would be. And I think we get so obsessed with making things perfect and how they look rather than how they feel. So if you hope to create meaning from it, it will be successful. You don't know what that meaning always will be. And if you're doing ritual in a community setting, each person is going to have their own meaning from that. So those are the four things that I invite people to kind of think about: the intention, the symbolism, the action, and then that meaning and how that might show up for you or for somebody else.
That's beautiful. I love how individual it is, how personal it is. There's no right or wrong. It's you are allowing yourself the space to feel into what feels right for you. And using your children as examples, I think that's so great. I think the older we get, the more we feel we need to do things a certain way. We might be judged if we don't do it right, quote unquote. And what you're saying is find something, take the time, or what I'm hearing anyways is, take the time to process what feels right for you to move forward, to have the acknowledgement and then the intention and that sense of meaning. I love all that. So thank you for giving us the freedom with that, because I've always thought that things had to be done a certain way. Like when we did the spreading of my uncle's ashes recently, it was just a small intimate group, and I've never done that before, and everybody was looking to me to lead this little ceremony, and that came as a surprise, actually, because I don't know, I just thought I was going to show up and be a part of something, but for some reason I was the default leader, and it
Mhm.
actually initially caused some stress for me because I wanted to do it right. And ultimately, what I did is just what felt right for me, and then everybody ended up doing exactly what I was doing, and I thought, oh, okay, that's okay if that's what everybody else wants to do. But it initially just caused some stress because I didn't give myself the space and time to figure out what I really wanted until I was thrown in this situation and I've got all these eyes on me. It was really uncomfortable initially. So I wish you and I had connected before, because I probably would have spent a little more time um, allowing myself to process what I really wanted, and ultimately it was fine. But it was just, I think I created more stress for myself by not giving myself the space to figure out my own feelings around things. So this is good.
Yeah. And as somebody who does a lot of end of life ceremonies, especially after somebody's died, working with families around memorials and death anniversaries and celebrations of life, I think often the planner will come in and they'll want to create the meaning for everybody. They'll want to say, okay, this is what I want everybody to feel. And ultimately, we have no control over that. All we can do is set up the conditions, and invite people to opt in and opt out, kind of step in or step out as much or as little as they want. And I think if people feel that the ritual is imposing on them and they have to kind of follow something that is that structure, sometimes that's helpful and sometimes people love that. And sometimes people really repel from that. So I think I try whenever I present a ritual to a large group, I give people lots of permission to step in and out of it in a way that might feel right to them and to create their own personal meaning that ultimately I have no control over how that's going to happen. And I think the pandemic really showed us that, right? Suddenly all of our normal rituals were taken from us, especially around grief and loss and death.
Yeah.
And so I had people reaching out, and this is part of the inspiration for Be Ceremonial, is I had people reaching out all over the world. Because at that point, people had heard of me and knew that I was somebody who was looking at ritual in a little bit more of an adapting, shifting, evolving way. And so, I had people reaching out. A young mom had just had a stillbirth and she wanted to create a ceremony, but she couldn't gather her family because they were all in France and she was in the US. So we came up with a way to create a ceremony using technology to connect us, but ultimately it was giving each person a chance and an opportunity to do something in their own home, in their own space, and to acknowledge the grief they were personally holding, and then come together as a community and share that and witness each other, because that for me is the essence of that ceremonial setting. So I talked a little bit about a ritual earlier. And a ritual can be something that stands alone. You can just do one ritual. For me, I can, my morning ritual, I might have something that I do before bedtime. My 7-year-old daughter, we have our bedtime ritual, and I ask her the same 3 questions every night, and we kind of move through those questions. But then if we look at a ceremony for me is kind of that larger container. So it strings together rituals in a way that's going to ultimately move us through a time of change and give us that kind of that storytelling component where we're telling a story through ritual. And that's how we based our platform, Be Ceremonial, is we give people rituals to kind of open the space, things that are going to invite you to step across that threshold. And now you're in that ceremonial container. And then rituals to acknowledge the past and release what we might be letting go of or what we want to acknowledge. Then we then give people rituals around being present and in the moment. And then rituals on how to carry this forward. What's the legacy we're going to carry with us? What's the meaning we're going to weave into the rest of the day, the rest of the week, the rest of the year? And then a ritual to close. So I often say it's like a cooking pot. The ceremony is the big giant cooking pot, and the rituals are the ingredients that we throw in to make that experience unique to us. And it's built on a traditional rite of passage framework. So traditional rites of passage have this separation. You're letting go of what was, you're separating yourself from who you were. And then you're stepping into this kind of liminal space where you're kind of in that in between. And then you're incorporating what you've learned into how you're going to move forward. So we think about, coming of age. A child moves into that space, that liminal space, and then they move into that adolescence and they've learned something or they've acknowledged something or they've been given gifts from the elders. So that's the traditional rite of passage structure that we really draw a lot of inspiration from.
Right. Okay, great. So, leading ceremonies, who can lead? I'm guessing anybody can lead. Where do you
Yeah.
start?
So
Where do you start
yeah,
from?
in Canada, I mean, it's different all over the world. In Canada, anybody can lead any ceremony except a wedding. You can't legally marry somebody in Canada unless you are, ordained or part of some kind of religious or metaphysical body, a governing body. But anybody can lead a ceremony around, a funeral, a celebration of life. I think that most of us in Western society, we're familiar with ceremonies around birth, marriage, and death. Those are kind of the three times. And usually when we are experiencing ceremonies, it's usually a bit of a template, right? Oh, we're going to a baby shower. We're used to what to expect. Or we're going to a wedding. We're used to kind of a series of events. And we're going to a funeral. We kind of expect certain things. So what I'm interested in is, first of all, what if we take the ceremonies around those three big moments in life and shift it and shuffle it up and make it something unexpected that doesn't follow the set order? But also, what are all those moments of change in between that we fail to recognize and we fail to create ceremony around? When we're talking about grief and death and dying, I mentioned with my father-in-law, like, what if we had a ceremony around receiving a terminal diagnosis? And
Mm.
what if we came together as a family or a small community or a large community and we created something at that moment that helped each and every one of us, including the person who's received, and especially the person who's received the diagnosis, acknowledge and let go of some things that they're now having to reckon with and support them through that, through ritual. I worked with a community of women in the States through Hope Edelman and the Motherless Daughters community. And I worked with them to create a ceremony when they were about to turn the age their mother was when their mother died.
Ah, yes. That
So a
seems to
lot of,
be
yeah,
that seems to
yeah.
be a topic that's coming up a lot in my friend circle right now.
Mm.
Whereas there, people are approaching the ages of when their parents, died. A lot of them died young. So that's interesting, and I can see how that could be really important. Are these the invisible moments that you talk about?
Yeah, so I refer to them as these seemingly invisible moments, and for me,
Right.
they're these moments that don't get a lot of airtime. They're not the things that most people are talking about, and
Yeah.
yet, turning the women that I worked with, they were about to turn the age that their mother was, and this date had been seared in their mind their entire life. They
Mm.
knew it was coming, and yet nobody else would know. You would be going to work that day, be coming home, unless you specifically told somebody. And even then, they might not understand the magnitude of it. They might not understand what it is to reach that day and then reach the next day when you're now one day older than your mother or your father or your friend ever got to live. And how do we reckon that? How do we acknowledge the multitude of emotions that we're feeling in that experience? And ritual and ceremony is one way, a beautiful way and a powerful way that you can create your own meaning and make that day. You're not going to fix it, you're not going to make it better, but you're going to acknowledge what you're holding, and hopefully that can help support you through your journey.
Right. So it's for instance, my husband is approaching the age where his father passed away. In fact, I think his next birthday this month is approaching the age of when his dad passed. So what would you recommend to me as the support person of my husband? Should we get into a dialogue on what that time means, or like what kind of advice would you offer?
Yeah, I think the first thing would be, it's really hard to convince somebody else to have a ceremony if you
Okay.
don't already have a relationship with ritual and ceremony yourself, because they're going to kind of look at you and think, "Oh gosh, what are you
Yeah,
talking
it's
about?"
not a big deal to me. Whatever.
Yeah. So we have to be really careful not to push our own feelings. And you yourself might need something. This date might be a big day for you because
Mm.
and so understanding, how you can do your own work to kind of acknowledge what you're feeling and holding, and then support him. And he might be inspired by some of the things that you've done or that you're thinking through. I know with my husband, he lost his father 7 years ago and went home to Sweden this summer with his ashes, and he led an ash scattering ceremony, his first time doing this as well, with his uncle and male cousins. So a big group of Swedish men. Nobody knew what to do. Everyone was looking at Johan. He said he looked in our app because we have an ash scattering ceremony, and he was thinking, okay, what is it that's important? And ultimately, he said, I didn't do it the way you would do it, Meg. I did it the way I did it, and it was so good. And that's exactly what I hope, is that nobody's going to try to recreate the way that I would do something. I just want to give them ideas and inspiration. So with your husband, I would kind of take that traditional rite of passage and think about, okay, what is it that you want to honor from the past? Are there any stories you want to tell, or maybe bring out some photo albums, maybe spend some time kind of looking back. There might be some anger or kind of displaced emotions or fear or frustration that never got verbalized or vocalized, you can invite him to write some of those down and burn them in a little fire and have a release ritual. But somehow kind of acknowledging the past in a way that feels right to him. Doing something in the middle that invites you just to pause. And, for my husband and I, we might go outside by the fire and just, look up at the stars and just take a quiet moment of silence and acknowledge something and just be in the present and not try to rush through. I think most ceremonies, people are rushing. They're trying to get to the end. They're trying to get it over with because they're really uncomfortable. And it's just something we're not used to, sitting with all these emotions. So the best thing we can do is just pause and just let those kind of move through us in a way that feels right. And then the third is thinking about, okay, what was his father's legacy? What is he going to carry forward? What is he going to weave into the rest of his life? And then in turn, what's his own legacy, and how can he start planting those seeds and start kind of having a relationship with that, and think about the rituals that are going to help him acknowledge what will be? Because ultimately we have no control over what will be, but we have that ability to be intentional with how we spend our life. And the studies, the research are showing that the stronger our relationship and our connection with mortality and with death and dying, the richer our lives will be, because we live in a different way when we are completely aware and present of our mortality. And so it doesn't need to be a scary conversation, but it can be something of saying, okay, like what, in this next chapter in life, what is it that you want to do? What do you want to do in your dad's honor? How are you going to bring him, what he taught you, the lessons he gave you, into this next time?
I love that. Thank you. That's really helpful. So, what are some other invisible moments that surround death, dying, and grief?
So, and those are three very big topics that, so for grief, I mean, we're grieving every day. And I think for many of us, we were told a story about grief, that it follows 5 neat and tidy stages, and that we can get over our grief. There's this end to our grief. And when you are going through grief, you quickly realize, first of all, it doesn't always follow those stages, and it's really messy, and you might get stuck in one and come back to it again. And
Mm.
it's it's not what we had been told it was. And second is, there's no completion to it, there's no end to it. I still go over, I have a bridge in the forest that I call my miscarriage bridge, and I went over it last week, and I picked up a rock and I threw it over one edge, and the tears just came. And I thought back to those 3 babies that I lost, and that grief was ever so present. It wasn't as heavy, it didn't sting the same way that it did 8, 9, 10 years ago, but it was there. And I think finding ways to walk with our grief and acknowledge it. I often will be driving, and I think I'll see my father-in-law. He was a very distinct looking 6'5" Swedish man. And because I never spent time with his body after he died, which I regret, I had a 2-month-old baby, and I was kind of encouraged by the medical staff to not go in.
Mm.
Because again, we have this relationship with death and dying where we're like, oh, you shouldn't have to see that. Whereas I think it would have done me really good to have seen his body and allowed my brain to catch up with my heart. But so for many years, I would think I would see him, and I would just push that moment down. I think, oh, just don't let that come up. Just keep driving or keep walking. And now what I do is I take that seemingly invisible moment where the grief is suddenly surging up. I see a man that looks just like him, and he turns around, and it's obviously not him, but the grief is now there. It's come to the surface. And instead, I will go and I will find a bench, or I'll pull the car over, and I will sit for a few minutes, and I will pretend that he's sitting right next to me, and I will tell him about his granddaughters, or I will tell him about his son. And I will take 2 minutes out of my day to acknowledge that grief that I'm feeling, which is that he's not here and that he never got to see his granddaughters and be a part of our life. And so I'm using my own kind of moment of connection and intention, and creating my own meaning in that 2 minutes. So I'm not feeling the grief rising and pushing it down and moving on with my day. I'm allowing that grief to come up and surface, and I'm acknowledging it, and I'm welcoming it into my day.
Yeah, that makes me want to cry. And it's beautiful. It's I need to take a breath.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really Yeah, heartfelt, real, important. Have those moments to give yourself that gift of time, right?
Yeah.
To experience that. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that really sits with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we all have it, right? We
Yeah.
all have those moments where we think we see someone or we think of somebody and we don't know what to do. And so for the most part, we do nothing because we haven't. So if that can kind of invite whatever it's going to be like for you. And again, it
Yeah.
shouldn't be the same for each person. You do your own thing. You might see a friend that you grew up with that died, and you used to go to the Dairy Queen together. So you might go to the Dairy Queen that week and
Nice.
do something in her honor. So those are the things that I invite people to really think about is how we acknowledge that grief rather than pushing it down. And I
Yeah.
have a weekly swimming circle that I started during the pandemic, and we cold water swim in the ocean year round. And we meet every Sunday. It's our version of nature church, ocean church. And we each spend about 5 minutes walking along the beach floor, and we choose an object that's representative and symbolic of something we're grieving, big things, little things. We get into a circle and we share our grief. And then
Mm.
we take that object and we throw it in the water, or we gently release it and place it in. And then we go into the water. We have that moment of stillness where we're so present and connected. And then we come out and we share what we're going to carry with us from that experience for the rest of the day, the rest of the week. And it's so funny. Every Sunday I'm driving, I'm like, oh, I'm not really grieving anything this week. And I don't know what I'm going to share. And then I start walking along the beach, and it just comes, all the grief that I've been feeling all week that I didn't really know where to
Mm.
put it. But being intentional with how we not only process our own, but also hold space for others, because I might not be grieving something big, but 15, 20 women coming, and men sometimes too, coming together. There's somebody in that group who's going through something big that week. And if we now give her an opportunity to share, about her friend who's going through chemo and how hard it is to see her friend that way. And we don't try to solve it. We don't try to fix it. We just let her express it, and then take her big, heavy rock and throw it in the water as an acknowledgement.
Yeah. That's a beautiful ceremony. Is that a ceremony or is that a ritual? That's a ceremony that you
So
have.
at the ceremony, because we're moving through that,
Ritual.
that thing with different rituals, and a lot of people, again, not prescriptive. If you want to call it a ritual, if you want to call it, that
Yeah.
it's for everybody to figure out their own. But for
Right.
me, we call them our ceremonial swims, and they involve kind of three distinct rituals that are really easy, and people can opt in and opt out. They don't have to. But for the most part, people crave this. This is why they're coming for the cold water, but really they're coming for the community, and this aspect of not, the idea of self-care is wonderful in theory, but in practice, when you're grieving, when you're going through something hard, like having a loved one die or receiving medical news of your own, self-care is practically impossible. So
Mm.
this is when community care needs to step up and say, okay, you are holding a lot right now, and to ask you to try to solve that and fix it for yourself, and it is a lot. So why don't you let your community come together and hold that with you?
I really like that community care. That's a concept I haven't really given much thought to, and can see how valuable it would be to have community care, particularly when you're going through grieving or any kind of difficult, challenging time. So, let's talk a little bit about your app, Be Ceremonial. How does it inspire people to bring more ritual into their life?
Yeah, so we started with the idea of just looking at all of these seemingly invisible moments across the life cycle. Moments connected to birth, moments connected to, moving into a house or leaving a house, house cooling ceremony, getting divorced, having an organ transplant. I've worked with women who have had mastectomies and hysterectomies. How do we create a ceremony around that? And then ultimately around, the thing that all of us that's going to happen to us, the thing that connects all of us, is that we're all going to die, and how we approach that. And we might have cultural rituals that are built in, and that's wonderful. And if we don't, what do we do when we're sitting vigil, in the 1 or 2 or 3 days before somebody dies? What are we supposed to do? And so we give people a lot of different ideas and inspiration. It's like a choose your own ritual adventure. So if you choose the sitting vigil ceremony, or the home funeral ceremony, or the scattering ashes ceremony, You're guided through the experience of picking and choosing from hundreds of secular and universal rituals, and you can add your own spiritual or religious or cultural meaning on top of them. We have a lot of rabbis using our app, and they bring this into their communities as kind of a place to start, and then they'll add their own Jewish faith on top of it. And then a lot of people who are like staunch secular scientific, they don't want any woo woo. They just want, this is about mental health for them, and they will choose other rituals that feel approachable for them, like my husband. So I think we're really trying to give something for everybody. So the app started with this kind of larger ceremony, and we've just launched these idea of daily rituals. So the idea of what are things that you can do in your day that help us build these ritual muscles up. Because if we, like I mentioned earlier, if we don't have a relationship with ritual ourselves, it's really hard to convince or show somebody else that they should as well. So thinking about your morning and your bedtime and, anger rituals and burnout and all of these things that we're facing in our life, what are some things that we can do that take 5 minutes or less, that don't require us to have to gather a lot of supplies and take a lot of time away? My beautiful co-founder in my other business, Seeking Ceremony, Kate Love, she calls them slivers of time. So especially as, young moms with the sandwich generation, right? We've got aging parents, little kids, we're all working full time. Like, we have slivers of time. I don't have 3 hours a day to have this beautiful ritual that's gonna, I've got 2 minutes, and I've got to be able to do what I can in that 2 minutes. And you can do a lot. If you're doing that ritual every day or every other day, acknowledging the grief and the gratitude that you're holding at once, processing your emotions, that actually can take you quite far. So we've launched these idea of daily rituals to inspire people in a more kind of regular way. And then we have the Be Ceremonial Village, which is an online community. It's a place where we put courses and workshops. There's ability to connect with others who are also kind of seeking ceremony in their own way. Ask questions. A lot of people will come. We do a lot of work with MAID, with the medical assistants in dying community. And a lot of people will come and say, I'm my mom or my friend's dad or somebody that I know is about to have medical assistance in dying, and I want to know how I can support them. What are some of the things? And people will, I'll offer what I can, but I want this to be the community care, right? I want everybody else to say, oh, when my mom died, this is what we did, and this one didn't work so well, but this worked really beautifully, and maybe you could find your own version of that. And ultimately, it's about storytelling, right? Us all coming together and removing the taboo from this subject and inspiring people with what's possible.
Beautiful. Can you share a couple of what are your daily rituals? I noticed when we came together on this call just before we started, you lit a candle, and I love that. It's and you said this is, help ground me, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
What are a few other, just just to get the ideas floating for people? What are a few other daily rituals that you can easily create?
Yeah. So one of them that's in the app, it's called a two-sided coin. And I've got them all over the place, but I'll either take a piece of cardboard or paper and I'll cut it into a circle. Sometimes I'll take a rock if I don't have paper handy. And I'll think about two things that I'm holding right now that seem in contrast with each other. They seem like they're polar opposites, and I don't really know how to hold both. An example was when my father-in-law died, because it was a long, drawn-out illness. I felt a lot of relief and gratitude when he died.
Mm.
And I also felt sorrow, and I felt a little bit of anger. And like, I felt all these emotions all at once. And we're not taught how to hold multiple things at once.
Mhm.
We're often we've been trained to be in the pursuit of happiness. And if things get in the way of that happiness, an example would be at my wedding. My father-in-law was still alive, and I wanted to create space in our wedding ceremony to express the grief that we were holding as a family unit. And everybody was so uncomfortable with that at first. They say, no, it's a wedding. It's a time of joy. Like, we don't want to bring grief and sadness into this. But grief and sadness was already there. It was the elephant in the room. I just wanted to create space for it and be a bit more intentional. So this idea of holding polarities is something that I have to continue to do almost daily, because I'm an empath. I feel a lot. And I have to also kind of understand what are my emotions and what am I holding for others. So I'll take a piece of paper and I'll cut it in a circle, and I'll distill them down to one word each. And maybe this day I'm holding fear, and I'm also holding trust.
Mm.
And I'll hold the fear side of the coin in my left hand, and I'll close my eyes, and I'll just notice where it is in my body. Maybe it's in my stomach, maybe it's in my throat, maybe I can feel it kind of in my shoulders. And I'll just acknowledge that it's there, and I'll just give it permission. I'll breathe into it and just notice it. And then I'll flip the coin over to my right hand, and I will do the same with the trust. And I'll think, where am I feeling trust right now? And where can I really, does it have a color or a scent, or is it heavy? Is it light? And I'll hold that trust. And then I'll bring both my hands together, and I'll hold both at once. And I'll just take a few deep breaths and allow myself to not have to choose, to not have to place them in hierarchy, but to recognize that at this moment, I am holding both fear and trust, and that's okay.
That's so beautiful. I love that. And so you said you can do that with a rock. Do you have to paint the words on the rock, or can it just be, I found this rock. Reason I asked, I found this rock the other day. I was drawn to pick up this rock, and it just fits so perfectly in my hand. And I was thinking, what am I going to do with this rock? But I
It can
brought
be
it
your
home,
two-sided rock.
and
Yeah.
it
And
could be
it's,
my two-sided rock. Do I have
yeah.
to actually write paint on the rock the different words, or can I just hold that in my mind and today's
Well,
trust?
I'm gonna, after our conversation here, it's whatever you need it to be, right? And so
Right.
you don't need you can make it whatever you want. And you can, that I've done this ritual with people with nothing, right? We hold our hand in a fist kind of, and we hold something in our left hand and we hold something in the right. I believe in the ability of these rituals to adapt. They need to
Yeah.
adapt to suit. You might not have a pen handy. That's okay. It doesn't mean you can't do the ritual. The
Yeah.
ritual is not the action itself. It's the intention going into it, right? It's the combination of all of the things. So if you are drawn to this rock and you feel like it's kind of, you want to infuse it with some of those polar opposites that you're holding at any one time, you can make it your own. And that's the
I am
beauty of it
gonna
all.
totally make it my own. I got ideas floating through my head now, and I feel excited
Good.
about the creative process that's gonna come and holding this rock, which is
Yeah, and
awesome.
that's what I see this is. I tell people this is artistic, this is
Yeah.
creative, this is unleashing our kind of imaginations as to what ritual can be and what we need it to be. And
Yeah.
I've had rituals that I used to do that I don't do anymore because it's just not what I need anymore, not who I am, and I've let them go. And new rituals will find their way. And then I've got this rock here. It's got 3 hearts on it,
Mm.
and I hold it, and it fits perfectly in my hand. It feels like a little heart. And this was for my three miscarriages. And when
Mm.
I hold this rock, I'll sometimes be in a meeting and I'll just pick it up and I'll just kind of massage it around in my hand. And it's just allowing my internal self to say, okay, yes, that happened. I might not even be grieving at that moment. It's just almost a recognition. And
Mm.
I've worn the rock out. I've held it so much, but I do love that. I love having ritual tools all around me.
Right.
So when that's the idea of building the muscles, right? So if you have a relationship with ritual on a day-to-day basis, you have these ritual tools you can draw to. When you get that phone call that somebody you love has died, or somebody that you love has received a terminal diagnosis, yes, the floor will fall out from beneath you. Yes, you will feel lost. Yes, you will, have to catch your breath. And once you do, you will start to realize you have these rituals at the ready. You have this
Mm.
relationship already. And you can now move through this with a little bit more guidance and a little bit more inspiration and a little bit more intention, and not feel like you did with your ash scattering. Even though everyone was kind of looking at you because they might not have had a relationship already with ritual, whereas you've been developing this, you might not have known it was ritual,
Mm.
but you've been building this up. And so you had those muscles already ready to flex.
That's so interesting. Yeah, yeah, and true. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Now, you mentioned that you had a gift for the listeners today. Can you tell us a little bit about what that gift is?
Yeah, so we're going to share a link that you can kind of on our beceremonial.com website in our FAQ section, and it teaches you how to redeem a free ceremony. So I would love to give everybody the chance to explore our platform and choose a ceremony across the life cycle. There's about 34 that you can choose from right now, and pick one that you're drawn to and use the promo code that we'll include. And I think we decided it was
Joyful Journey is the
Joyful Journey, all
joyful.
capital, all one word, Joyful
Okay.
Journey. And you can put that into redeem that coupon code, and that will give you the chance to unlock one of the ceremonies. You can create it for yourself. You can also gift it to somebody else. So you might see, a house cooling ceremony or a divorce ceremony or a menopause ceremony and think, oh, I have this friend who could really use this now. And you can pay the gift forward and you can
Yeah.
send them the ceremony, and have it be passed on like that.
And what's the
Um,
website that they go to get that?
so it's www.beceremonial.com, and you can set up a free account. And then when you choose your ceremony, you go through the experience, and at the bottom you'll redeem the code instead of paying for it. And it's typically $10 Canadian, but we also have annual membership. So if you want to be part of our online community, our village, and have access to the daily rituals, then we invite people to become members and to join us in this journey, because it's something that we're learning from each other. Every month, every week, somebody new will come, and they'll come with specific questions and also knowledge to share. And that's my real big hope, is to create this community where we are teaching each other and learning from each other at all times.
Wonderful. All right. Well, we'll make sure to include all that information in the show notes so people can find your link, find the promo code, go check out Be Ceremonial, the app. And yeah, thank you for all the work that you're doing. This is really important work, and there's a big space that needs to be filled. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today on the Joyful Journey podcast. Really enjoyed that. It felt very heart centered. So thank you.
Mm.
And Joyful Journeyer, thank you so much for tuning in and being here with us today. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a comment or a review. Share it with somebody you think that would like to hear or learn more about the work that Megan is doing. And that's it. We'll catch you next time. Bye for now.